Welcome to Ignite Intimacy, a podcast exploring intimacy, romantic relationships, sexuality, and the all of everything that relates to these hot topics. We're going in. You ready? This is your host, Miss La. Let's do this. Welcome, everyone, to a next episode of Ignite Intimacy. I am very excited about our guests today for many different reasons, which we'll get into. But, I'm just so fascinated by the flipping of the script of sexuality, gender, especially being here in New York City. I'm just noticing what I would call, and I don't know if this is the right term, and maybe you guys can help me with this, but just gender fluidity and just the expression of who you be in the world. And it's quite fascinating and inspiring, and I think really quite courageous as well. So I have got two folks on the line with us today, Caleb and Matthew, I was introduced to them by Lucia Paxton, who's been on Ignite Intimacy a couple of times. And so these guys were totally open to jumping on the line and sharing some juicy goodness with the Ignite Intimacy community, just about their own journeys with sexuality and business and their own, association or definition of who they be in the world as defined by sex, sexuality, attraction, and connection with other human beings. And then how to take that power and that energy and forward it to uplift and inspire and empower others, not only in their own journey of who they be as an individual and their gender and their sexuality, sexual preferences, but also in business. So Caleb and Matthew, thank you so much for joining me from New York City to San Francisco.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So we had an opportunity to chat a couple of days ago, and you guys shared a lot with me about both your paths, a little bit about how you met, and then what you're moving into now. What I would love to do is just, share with the audience. Well, actually, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read your bio. I don't normally just read the bios straight away, but I want to give some context for who you are to our audience today. And then we're going to dive into some past, just how did you get into the work that you're doing today and who you are today. So Caleb and Matthew, who are on the line with us today, they're a dynamic power couple that is anything but ordinary. They found each other 3 years ago on a hookup app. Yes, love can happen as a result of an app, in case anyone out there is wondering, and knew right away that it was love. They spent the last 3 years getting to know each other and themselves, making each day an adventure. Whether it is throwing BDSM play parties, running erotic massage exchanges, or dressing up in drag for a night of dancing, there is never a dull moment for these two. If you want, so we'll share links and information on how you can find them at the end of the episode. But for now, eroticexploration.com, LGBTQentrepreneur.com are two ways that you can find Caleb and Matthew online. And so what I'd love to do is let's start with you, Matthew, a little bit about your past and, what brought you into the world that you're existing in today.
Yeah, definitely. So first you can tell that I wrote the intro because Caleb's story of what it was like when we first started dating is a little different. He says that I kind of just kept coming over and never left. And then it turned into love. I'm a Midwest boy. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. And, I had just basically an average existence and average life in Ohio. But I kind of always knew that I was made for something bigger. I hear people that live in cities on the coast, they say that a lot if they were born in the Midwest. Just this idea that Ohio is not big enough for me. And that kind of was from a super early age. And I was always ultra curious about body, and I was curious about sexuality, all that stuff that our body can feel and do.
Yeah.
And my story is basically one of just, and I've realized over the years that this is a common story for us, but shame and guilt and fear all struck me right around puberty, right around the time when I started to actually explore hooking up with other people and getting naked in front of another person and then judging myself based on what they look like and what I look like. I'd never seen another, like, you know, penis in real life. And the first person I hooked up with happened to be just way larger than me. And so that became like the snowball, like the tiny snowball of self-doubt and self-judgment at the top of a very large mountain. And from there, it just kind of like, you know, I went to college and had more experiences of just judgment and just a lot of self-loathing, which is really bizarre because if you know me now and if you've seen me now in the last, you know, 10 years, people can't even believe that I have a background that included any sort of like lack of confidence or self-doubt, or at one point I had an eating disorder because I was trying to I wanted to control how I looked, and I had an idea of what it meant to be beautiful.
And what was that pivotal moment that you made the transition from feeling insecure, having all that self-doubt, and then moving into a space where you were like, this is me, I'm going to own it and claim it and celebrate it? Yeah.
So it's funny. There's actually a workshop that somebody suggested that I do called Celebrating the Body Erotic.
Wow.
And I didn't want to do it. I was like, I'm not into this like hippy dippy, get in a room with a bunch of men, take our clothes off. Like, it just sounds really weird. But they
sounds awesome.
Right. It does now. Like, now I can't wait to go get in a room of naked men. But it was just this, like, it was super highly suggested, and I did it. And it was a container that I really needed in order to break through a lot of the limiting beliefs that I have. It was a container that I needed to process a lot of the things that were going on for me from an early age. And I left that weekend pretty much never being the same. I really and I would love to say it was like, that was my burst out of the confidence closet. Like, I was like ready, right? But I think with life in general, it's an inhale and an exhale. So I took a really big inhale that day, and then I had a pretty decent size drop, like that exhale.
And it's the journey, right? It's like, we're seeding the future all the time in the present. And I did something called Pussy Church in Los Angeles this winter.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and Sierra Sullivan and Josephina Bashout, they facilitated. And what was so cool about it is you're sitting in this sacred environment with all of these other women sharing these intimate stories about, you know, self-pleasuring and orgasm and just how you feel about your body, and some women who had stories of abuse and different things. And you start to level the playing field. It's like the things that you never talked about with anyone, or maybe talked about with someone and then were shamed or made guilty, you know, to feel guilty for something. When all of a sudden you're in this group, and I can imagine like you're in this group of men, and it's like, you're seeing all different body types. You're seeing all different sized penises and testicles, and you know, you're just like experiencing. You're literally taking the veil off. You're taking like the clothes off, right? Yeah,
and then to hear like the same fears and anxieties come out of the mouths of people who I would consider to be perfect, right?
Totally.
Like these, like, statuesque built men, right? And I'm just like, oh wow, like you feel the same way I feel. How weird is that?
Well, and how eye-opening, right? It's like,
yeah,
I know I project all the time on people. I see people in a moment in time, and I make up this whole story about them, and like, oh, look at that happy couple, or oh, look at that person, she's got it going on, or, you know, whatever. And it's like, I don't know what they're like an hour from now. I don't really know what they're dealing with. Like, just because they have a gorgeous body, or they have a beautiful boyfriend or girlfriend, or they, you know, or the dream job, it's like, unless you really know that person and understand what their life experience is, you don't really know. So exactly. Yeah, more about just like leveling the playing field, lifting the veil, and exposing ourselves, whether physically, you know, or like emotionally or mentally, whatever it is.
Yeah. And so from there, like after doing that weekend workshop, I became like the preacher, right? Like I was talking to all my friends. I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to do this weekend. Like you need to go. And I got the looks that I was giving my friend who suggested it to me, where people were like, there's no way in hell that I'm going to go to a room and hang out with a bunch of naked men. Like that's not anywhere close to my comfort level. And that's when I realized that like there was actually work to be done one-on-one with people that aren't really in a position yet to go to a weekend workshop. And that's kind of where my one-on-one work started. So that erotic exploration page that you shared earlier is basically the work that I do with men. I take them through the weekend workshop, but in one-on-one sessions. And it was like, I feel like this needs to be more accessible to more people and out there, because it's such a healing work. It just didn't change my sex life. Like, obviously my sex life changed and my confidence changed. I can take my clothes off anywhere now. I go to street fairs naked. Like, I don't like being clothed. But it also just helps me, like, interpersonal relationships, family relationships, business relationships.
Okay, so we'll get into your work in a little bit later. But Caleb, I would love for you to share about your story as well, because it's really quite fascinating.
Yeah. So my story is different. I came out when I was 13 for the first time. And at that time, I came out as a lesbian. I was born female, and just always I had a strong attraction to other girls, and I didn't really fit in with the other girls. And was always really masculine. And then, so I came out when I was 13 as a lesbian and had a couple girlfriends in high school. And then I started college, and, this was back in the early 2000s, back around like 2001. And there wasn't really very much media attention given to transgender people. We didn't have like Laverne Cox and Caitlyn Jenner and, shows like Transparent or anything like that back then. So this idea of like transgender was really kind of mysterious. And I was part of a youth group actually, and we had a guest speaker come in who was transgender, female to male. And I remember just like hanging on every word that he said and being like, oh, that's it. Like, that's what I am. And that was, I was like 17 or 18 when that happened. And then I transitioned when I was 19 years old. And then, that was a while ago.
Yeah.
And then fast forward, I was probably about 29 or so. And I'd been in a relationship with my ex-girlfriend for a number of years when we broke up. And I was living out here in San Francisco, or in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And I was back on the market, and it was just kind of like, things had really changed. There's definitely a lot of gender fluidity out here in San Francisco. And it's kind of like, there are boys and girls, but then there's also like everything in between. So when I was back on the market, I was just kind of like, these lines of gender are kind of silly when you're going out in the dating world. And it's just like, in a lot of cases, the lines are really blurred. So when I was back on the market, I was just kind of like open for business to anyone, so to speak. And through that, I was also trying out men. And Matthew showed up in my life, and I didn't have any intentions of ending up in a relationship with another guy. I kind of, figured I was out having fun, and then ultimately I would probably end up settling down with another girl at some point, but that never happened. Matt showed up, and like he said, he never left. And so here we are now.
Wow. That is amazing. Well, and when you shared this with me, I just thought it was so fascinating just that you came into the world as a female and came out as lesbian. So you were dating women or dating girls as a teenager. And then you decided to actually make the physical transition. And when we spoke, you had shared that you were dating mostly straight women after you had your transition. And now you are in a relationship with a man, which just is so awesome. It's like, it totally is like a flip on the script of everything that, I've thought about as like possible. And it completely like blew open my mind and heart around just this whole world that is, for me, it's fairly new. Just the whole gender identification and transgender and making that physical transition and all of that. So it just like, I love this story and how it's truly a fluid experience.
Yeah, it definitely is. And for me, I think that part of it was just being open to like the possibilities of life and the possibilities of love. And I honestly think that for me, part of that just had to do with living in San Francisco in a place where it's just so open and accepted to like be yourself, no matter where that falls, no matter whether that's like in line with, you know, the roles that are put out for society. You know, it's funny. I feel really old sometimes when I talk about the back in my day. But, you know, things have really, really changed. You know, when I transitioned, there wasn't really anything like gender fluidity or gender queer where, you know, you could kind of toe the line in between male and female, or like you could transition, but not necessarily like fully embrace or embody the gender that you were transitioning into. You kind of just like, you know, if you were transitioning, like you were all in. And it's a whole new world out there these days.
So when I think about this, because we talked about this as well, just like identification, and you know, a lot of people like to identify as something specific. I've talked about my own being more open to expressing like my own sexual preferences or curiosities. However, I don't feel the need necessarily to like identify myself as anything in particular. So you guys expressed the definition of queer to me in a way that just like it was very simple. And I found myself up until we spoke last week still having this question like, but what does that mean? What does queer actually mean? So what is your definition of being queer?
So I think for me, being queer is just like, it gives me the freedom to like be attracted to any human that I find beautiful. And if that turns me on, that turns me on. And that's fantastic, right? I feel like it's one of those, it's a term that allows me to put a label on myself so that others can be appeased, but to also feel totally labelless.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because like, you know, Caleb and I are in our early 30s, and I do a lot of volunteer work. And one of the volunteers work that I do is for an LGBT hotline, where people can call in and get resources and just support. And we get a lot of kids that call in, and the generation of like 25 and under are really letting go of labels in a big way. Like they are rejecting gender labels. They're rejecting orientation labels. And they're basically just like, they're kind of asking the question, what's the point? Like, what's the point of like, if I have sex with a guy, who cares? If I have sex with a girl, who cares? Like, why are you asking me this? And it's refreshing that they're moving in that direction. But I think, you know, like Caleb said, I'm starting to feel older as well, because it's just like, I've lived in a world with labels my whole life.
Well, it is. I mean, I have a daughter who will be 20 in about a month and a half. I remember when she was growing up, there was just this totally different energy around sexuality. And like it was just sort of like not a big deal, you know? It was like, she's dating women now, or, it was just sort of like, like this very casual thing around it. And like, I remember being so kind of like, even though I was adventurous as a young person, I still felt a lot of shame and like shut down around it. And I remember, when I was 12, I started to feel, maybe a little bit younger, 10 or 11, starting to feel turned on when I would see women on TV or in the movies in bikinis or something like that. And I was terrified that I might be lesbian, and I kept that. I mean, I think I shared it with my twin sister, but beyond that, I didn't share that with anyone probably for 15 years after that. And so today it feels like, and I think about the courage that it takes to just be out there, and especially to be like a man who's dressing like a woman and just to be out in the world in that way. Like, I have such a deep respect for the level of courage that it takes to embrace that and to claim that and be that in the world. But I know that, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, it was, I mean, there was little openness and acceptance unless you were in certain communities.
Yeah. I mean, even 10 years ago,
yeah.
It was way different world. Pretty intense.
So it's interesting to just see how the generations are opening up, and it almost kind of becomes like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it just is what it is, you know? So you guys met on this hookup app, and you started hanging out, and Matthew was just like, he was like in the house. He's like, I'm not going anywhere, which I love.
Basically.
Yeah, I love that. So where was the point that you started to say like, oh, we could do some pretty cool work together? Like, what was that experience for you guys like?
So when I met Caleb, he was a full-time attorney working at a law firm.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And
I let Matt keep hanging out because he would make dinner.
I literally, like, because I was working in restaurants, and he would come home and you know, and I was doing my erotic coaching work as well. But he would come home and I would like make dinner, but we'd spend very little time together. And I knew it was love the moment we had this conversation where we were like kind of wanting to date each other, and he was just like, you know, I like women, and I was like, cool, I like women. And so it was just this really real conversation where we realized we weren't going to have a closed relationship because we admitted to each other right off the bat that we didn't have all the parts and pieces needed to satisfy one another fully. And so like, it was like, oh, so we're going to be our emotional, and 90% of our, you know, sexual needs will be met by one another. But every once in a while we'll be able to explore with other people. And just to have that like real honest conversation was really cool.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, I'm going to just jump in here because those are the conversations that more people need to have. And really, like, that is one of the biggest reasons why I started this podcast, because I was so tired of like meeting or, you know, going deep with my friends who weren't having those conversations with their partners or their spouse. And then in turn having affairs or, you know, getting into porn or like whatever they were doing to satisfy that because they didn't have the courage to actually have those conversations. So I think that's amazing and powerful that you guys were like, look, let's just put it all out on the table.
Yeah, I realized that with the work I was doing too, when I was doing like the kind of workshops and one-on-one sessions, it was like a lot of the people came to me were later in life. And this is after being married to a woman. If they're a guy, they were married to a woman for 40, 50 years. And their wife passed away. And they're like, now I get to explore. And it hit me hard that there's a lot of people who never had the courage to have conversations with their spouses. Like, hey, I'm curious about bisexuality, or I'm curious about what it'd be like to be with another guy. And they waited until like for 50 years. Which was really intense. And it just kind of struck me that like, I would never want to be in that position. I always want to speak openly and honestly about what I want and see what happens. Worst case scenario is I get a no, but I'd rather have a no than, you know, 50 years go by.
I mean, yeah, because like whether, you know, it's like you could wait so long that you don't even get a chance to express or experience that you're longing for, right? So like, what's the cost of waiting to have that conversation?
Right. And never getting to be you.
Yeah. And yeah, that's so powerful. And it's not like, I mean, having the conversation may create more like chaos before it creates more flow and fuller expression of self in the world. However, it's like, what's possible when you choose to take that more like courageous, just like, I have to speak this, you know, like this needs to be shared.
And is it like a week or a month of chaos worth it for 10, 15, 20 years of living a life where you wake up every day excited? And for me, I definitely would say yes to that. It's definitely worth it. So yeah, Caleb and I, he was always really supportive of the work I did, because I do a lot of hands-on body work, those kinds of things. And what he did for me was, he basically just gave me a lot of structure in my life, because I lacked structure so much. as an attorney, right? He just was like, he's like, hey, you're treating this kind of like a hobby. this whole like sacred intimate work and helping men do this thing. It's important work, but you're treating it like a hobby. And so he helped me turn it into a business, literally like in a short period of time, because he has a master's in business as well as he collects degrees. He's got a few of them.
Wow. Caleb, you're my kind of guy.
I got a smart one. And,
priceless.
And so, yeah, it's just like helping me create that business and growing that. And then, so Caleb got really ill, and I'm not sure if we talked about this before in our conversation, but there was a point in time where he like was in and out of the hospital for 3 months a couple years ago. Oh my God.
Okay.
And we thought he was going to die. Like somebody actually said to us that we should consider end of life preparations. And it was like, oh shit, I just met like the best person I've ever met in the world and have fallen in love for the last year. And now there's a possibility that he's going to die. And so we kind of came out of that experience. He ended up getting better kind of miraculously in a way. Like, they didn't know what was wrong. They did hundreds of tests, took some bone marrow, took some fluid from his lungs, took spinal taps. And in the end, they're just like, they kind of shrugged their shoulders at us and gave us Tylenol. But we left that experience feeling like that we didn't want to waste any time, right? Like together in our lives. And then we also realized, like, what if we joined forces? What if we used the skills that we both have together to join forces and help our community, like help LGBTQ people become more resourceful? I don't know if you know this, but transgender people are twice as likely to have a college degree, but 3 times more likely not to be employed.
Wow.
And it's because of, not fitting in or, not being accepted. And also,
in a lot of states, there's no protections. California is an exception, but a lot of states you can get fired or not be hired because of that as well.
You can still get fired for being gay in some states in this country. Like, it's pretty intense and sometimes backwards. But we realized that we both have created really successful businesses, and we wanted to pass that along to our community and show them some of the things that we learned.
That's amazing.
And spend more time together because we love each other.
Well, and life is precious, right? It's like when death is at your door, it's like a serious wake up call.
Yes.
And it brings to mind, are you familiar with Jennifer Brown? She has a book called Inclusion, and she has a podcast. She's a lesbian woman. She was in the corporate Fortune 500 space, working for major, huge companies. And she started this whole movement around diversity and inclusion because she felt like there was no one she could relate to in the corporate environment, because she was a, gay woman working at, the senior levels in large corporations and in that environment. And she's created this whole movement around diversity and inclusion in that space.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Check her out.
Yeah, totally. So I'll leave a link in the show notes as well for her book. But okay, so this is cool. So you guys were like, all right, let's do something together. Let's build on what we've been doing. Well, it sounds like, Matthew, you had some pretty interesting stuff going on with the intimacy coaching and healing and, the work that you were doing. And then Caleb, what was that transition like for you out of, being a lawyer, that's like a whole own set of, things that you're experiencing. So what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think transitioning out of being a lawyer, the hard part is like letting go of the title, because there's like a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into becoming a lawyer. And then also this like certain way that people treat you if you say, oh, I'm a lawyer. And that was the hard part. I think that letting go of the actual work of being a lawyer was easier because, well, at that point, I had my own firm where I have some clients. You can't just kind of transition out and drop everybody. So I'm still working with some clients, but I had my own firm. And so I was doing a little bit more of like what I wanted to do, as opposed to when I was working at a firm and it was like anything that got dropped on my desk, I had to do. But it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of really tedious work, like working within the laws of our country, which aren't necessarily always that great to work within. So that part was nice to be like, all right, I'm going to go into a type of law or a type of work where, where there aren't these stringent rules that I have to follow, no matter what, whether or not they make sense, whether or not they're helping people, and move into something where it's like we can really just help people. We can do what's right and what makes sense, and there's no set of legal rules that we have to follow to do this, and that was really nice. And then obviously just getting to work with Matthew, because we had both been running our own businesses. So in one sense, we both had a lot of freedom and flexibility, but in the other sense, we weren't seeing a lot of each other because we both had to put a lot of energy into our own businesses. And, lawyer work tends to happen 9 to 5. And a lot of the work that Matthew was doing would happen like after his clients got off work in the evening. So we really be like working these opposite schedules, even though we had let go of our jobs that were giving us paychecks and taking on that flexibility. So now being able to work together, like we do the behind the scenes work together, and we do almost all the work together, aside from one-on-one sessions with clients where one or the other of us will work with the clients. Everything else that we do together now.
Okay. And it sounds like you guys were doing some pretty spicy, fun play parties in the Bay Area. Was that part of something that you were doing collaboratively, or?
So for me, I had a dream of building some really powerful communities, and I love seeing people come together in a space and vibe and connect. Like I really feed off of seeing people come together. And so it started with a thing where I said, I'd love to see a bunch of people come together and dance naked in a yoga space. And Caleb was like, all right.
Whenever he says something like that, I'm like, so what are you waiting for?
Let's do it.
So we rented a space and we did this dance. And then we were at a play party one night, and Matthew was like, it would be awesome if there was like a sex party that was also like a tea party. That's kind of how my brain works. It's these random ideas that just flow through me. And Caleb was like, let's do it. And it was a huge hit here in the city. We had like about 130. Our first party, I think, had about 150 people. It was,
wow.
It was funny because we were like, we have no idea whether or not anybody else thinks this would be cool.
We thought the worst case scenario is we'd have a 6,000 square foot BDSM dungeon space rented to ourselves. We'd have some really nice tea and
and a lot of fun.
We had masseurs on standby to give massages. We had tarot card readers, and it was just a lot of fun. And
that's awesome.
It kind of launched us into this whole year and a half where we were just throwing these really beautiful BDSM play parties where we brought together a lot of that Burning Man vibe, that like everybody's welcome, all inclusion, leave your titles at the door, leave your gender at the door if you want, and come into the space and have a good time without criticism. And so we did that for a while, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the tea party was like our signature party that people really knew us for, but then we threw in a lot of different things and just tried things out, and like it was like, see what people like and what's fun. We had like one party where it was all about sensation play and just like different feelings in your body. And we even had like upgraded tickets where people could get private sessions with Matthew or with a woman who was working with us for that one.
We did a Harry Potter themed play party.
Oh, that was a big one too.
Nice.
And I pushed for the Harry Potter party for a long time because I'm a big Harry Potter fan, and Matthew was kind of like, I don't think anybody's going to go to that kind of a party. And it
was one of our most successful.
Yeah, with
I'm
the exception
sure.
of our first tea party, that was That was our biggest party. Everybody was into it, and
That's awesome.
nobody's doing it out here. I don't know if they're doing it in other cities, but nobody was doing it here, and there's just such a big following for that series. It really took off.
That's great. And so it sounds like, are you guys still doing those parties or no?
We're not doing the parties so much anymore. We might do a few throughout throughout time. But right now, we kind of want to take that mentality of bringing together people into this business niche that we're in, like growing the business community in the LGBTQ. So bringing entrepreneurs together to kind of have that same fun, connected vibe. And
entrepreneurs and business owners, people who are like self-employed.
And we'll just go, because the thing about throwing a party is that the parties are fun, but the organization and back end of it, there's a lot of work and parts and pieces and things that need to be organized.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a hobby for sure. It's like it's a full-time gig if you do it well. And so I think for now we're probably just going to go and enjoy other people's parties, or actually we have one person who we're going to be probably helping, coaching them with in their business to throw parties and teaching them what we've learned over the years. So that's also something that we offer as a service.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So I know this is is this business officially launched, or are you in the process of launching the coaching business for LGBTQ entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so it's officially launched, and we're super excited. So LGBTQentrepreneur.com is up and running, and we're having a gigantic 3-day live event here in the Bay Area in San Francisco.
Nice.
It's basically a 3 full-day summit, and we're doing we want as many LGBTQ entrepreneurs there as possible. So we're actually offering 100 full scholarships to attend, and so all that information's on our website. People can come totally for free, get a lot of insanely valuable information on how to start and grow their business starting that weekend.
Wow, awesome. Okay, that's really cool. And say the dates again?
It's September 15th, 16th, and 17th.
Okay, 16 through 17. Okay, great.
15th through 17th.
15. Okay, great. Cool. So, and people can find out more about that on LGBTQentrepreneur.com?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So as we're just kind of, wrapping up here, I'm curious if you could share just a story of maybe, obviously respecting confidentiality, but is there a story that comes to mind, someone that you've worked with that was really powerful or energizing or inspiring to be in a position to support that person with the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, the first example I'll give is from my own personal practice, and it relates a lot to the business that Caleb and I do together. I'm working with a 27-year-old who is so worried about being perfect when it comes to sex and interacting with other people that it shuts him down completely. Like, the perfection just gets to his head and he can't enjoy himself. He's totally afraid of looking wrong or his hair getting messed up or all that stuff, right? And so we've been working together for a couple months, because typically my clients and I work together for 2 months. And what we're doing is we're allowing him to relax a lot of that perfection syndrome that we suffer from. And the reason I say that kind of leads me to the work that Caleb and I do together is because most entrepreneurs that come to us are trying to be perfect. They're trying so hard to have the perfect website, the perfect business card, the perfect message, the right amount of certification
before they put it out to the world.
Yeah. And so, we do this work because we love seeing people just get out there and do it. Get out there and get their hands dirty. Get out there and make some mistakes. Like, we're, one of our mentors that we're following now, Tim Ferriss, says, like, your success is measured by the amount of uncomfortable conversations that you're willing to have. And I just love that so much, because life is like constantly uncomfortable if you're doing it right.
Totally. Well, and I love that you just mentioned Tim Ferriss, because I kid you not, 30 seconds before you mentioned Tim Ferriss, he popped into my head. Like, I don't know if it was something that you said that made me think of Tim Ferriss, but I was like, all of a sudden I was just thinking about Tim Ferriss, and then you mentioned his name. Anyways, that's cool. And he lives in the Bay Area, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Okay.
He used to come into a tea shop that I worked at for a while. It was a lot of fun to see him. I actually got to watch him write his book.
Nice.
that whole launch and stuff happened at my restaurant. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I haven't met him, but he's a fascinating guy.
Yes.
Well, and so I'm curious, do you guys have any like resource suggestions, books that you've read that are inspiring, or, anything that we can link to in the show notes that you'd love to share with our audience?
One book as far as like communicating with your partner that I would recommend is The Ethical Slut.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one that really early on in our relationship, we actually read it out loud together and kind of like discussed it as we read it. And it ended up being really, really valuable in just like defining our relationship. Matt mentioned earlier how we had the conversation of like, we didn't want to have a closed relationship. We both had other things that we wanted that would require an open relationship. And it's one thing to say you have an open relationship, but that can mean hundreds of different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized that really quickly, that it meant different things to each of us, and that we also didn't even necessarily know exactly what it meant to it for ourselves either.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so reading that, we were able to define it for ourselves, but then also define it together, right? Because part of a relationship is compromising, and our definitions might not be the same. So how can we come to a definition where we both feel like our needs are being met?
Yeah.
So that was a big one.
That's a great book. And many of our guests have brought that book up. I've read it, or I listened to it on audio. And I honestly think that whether or not you're exploring open relationships or polyamory or whatever, I really believe it is a phenomenal guide for exactly what you said, partner to partner communication. And like, it's like, if you can read that as like a book club with your partner or with your partners and start to open up some dialogue there, I think it's a phenomenal way and a sort of a guide for how to do that.
Yeah. I'd also say one of the things that Caleb and I really do in our life is we really go for it, right? We don't hold back. We don't let things like fear stop us from taking big action. And a book that was pivotal for that was The Big Leap. And it's that book is just really, it's a book for anyone really to just take a look at your life and see what's stopping you from moving forward and taking big action that could change your life, and how to kind of go through that process and do things anyway. So that was really pivotal for me in taking big action.
Awesome. And it's called The Big Leap?
The Big Leap, yeah.
Great. Cool. Well, so in just wrapping this up today, is there anything else that you just want to share with our community? I mean, we've got all different types of people from all different communities listening in to Ignite Intimacy. Any just words of inspiration or anything you feel just like inspired to share?
I would say that to follow your dreams, whether it's in, your love life, your sex life, your business life, whatever it is, just like go out and try it. You can always go back to the way that things were, but you can never, if you let opportunities pass you by, you might not have the chance to go back and seize those opportunities again. And that's really been the way that I've lived my life. And I think it's really important in order to just feel fulfilled and feel like you're doing in life the things that you're meant to do.
And don't be quiet about the experience that you've had. Don't keep in the challenges and the trials that you've been through. If you feel like you failed at something, good, share it with as many people as possible so that they can learn from what you've done. And if you've succeeded at something, even better, like share it with the people in your life so that they can see an example of somebody in their life who is living to the fullest. Because if there's one thing I think that we're missing, it's good examples of people who are failing forward and finally succeeding.
And that's really what our business comes down to. We struggled in our personal businesses before they were successful. And then we figured out what works. And that's part of what we share with people. What did we do where we were just failing? We were putting ourselves out there, but we were failing. And then what did we change that finally made us successful? And, if you've been out there and done it, like Matt said, if you share it, you can help other people.
Absolutely. Well, I love that. It's a myth that people just become successful right away. It's usually, there is a chunk of time, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I mean, there are plenty of stories out there where, people were just trying and trying and trying this and trying that. And then they're 50 and something hits and it's like this ginormous success. Or, there's definitely folks out there who hit something right away, but that's the exception, not necessarily the rule. So I know there's been plenty of times where I've sat in my home office just feeling like a complete failure and feeling so terrible about myself and thinking that other people have it better, or, oh, look at them and look at this new thing they're launching. And if you're not talking with those people, if you're not sharing, right, and reaching out and connecting, you don't really know what those other people are going through. It may seem like they're successful on the outside, but maybe they're $50,000 in debt and they're stressed out every day. But it's interesting because I just, after knowing about it for years, I just recently engaged in the Landmark Forum and I did the advanced course, and it's all about sharing, right? It's like, if you're not sharing, then you're not connecting, then you're not learning, then you're not expanding and growing. And like you were saying, Matthew, just about like being uncomfortable. It's like, how can we all get a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable and just, allowing the discomfort. And then because there's some real juice and goodness in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you guys, thank you so much for joining us today on Ignite Intimacy. We have been speaking with Caleb and Matthew. You can check them out online. Their partnership business, their collaborative business is LGBTQ entrepreneur.com. If you don't know how to spell entrepreneur or it gets twisted in your mind, just Google it. It's one of those words, but
it is.
LGBTQ entrepreneur.com. Matthew's website is eroticexploration.com. They do have an upcoming live summit happening in San Francisco, September 15th through 17th. We'll link to all of that stuff in the show notes. And we just want to thank everyone for being here with us today. Ignite Intimacy. We are on the exploration together. So give thanks and stay blessed. Until the next time, we'll see you soon. Ciao for now. Give thanks for tuning in to another conversation on the Ignite Intimacy podcast hotline. We love that you choose to spend your time with us. Check us out online at igniteintimacy.com and subscribe to us on iTunes. Also, tell your friends all about it. This beautiful music was arranged by Jason Pfaff and Mike Corey. And this podcast is produced by yours truly, Miss La. Give thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, let your light shine bright and ignite your intimacy.